this Forest Service. And how lucky are we that we come back to think about community and how we all need to take care of each other. These are 4 people that live and breathe that every day. So I'd like to introduce John Twitchell from the State Forest Service, Brandon Vogel from the Bureau of Land Management, Michael Woodbridge from the Routt National Forest, and Tony Tully, also from the Bureau of Land Management. We're going to start with some little presentations and talk about, again, forest health and where we're at, and then we're going to open up for some questions. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And do you have his presentation?
I wasn't allowed.
Oh, you weren't allowed? Oh, I know there was discussion. My apologies. I know there was discussion on that.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, so John Twitchell, as most of you know, I've been a forester in this area now for several years. What are you signaling? Louder? Oh, 7. I usually pace when I talk, but I'll try 6. Yeah, and most of you know me, but I'm a forester here for the Colorado State Forest Service, going on 25 years. Was fortunate to be a wildland firefighter for most of that time. So kind of a mix of those experiences, which I think helps me today. I thought I was subtle, but I guess maybe not. So my job here today is just to quickly sort of set the stage a little bit on forest condition. Most of us in this room are pretty familiar with our forest condition, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about how we got here and what we've done in the more recent past to address it. And, as we go forward, it's good to be able to look back and see where we've been. So, as a forester working in this area, we working particularly in the lodgepole, so a little below that alpine and subalpine zone where a lot of us live. The forest in 1900 was pretty young around here because there'd been a lot of fires. Native Americans probably set some of those fires, and some of them just occurred naturally. But overall, in 1900, there wasn't a Routt yet. It was a forest reserve, Parks Reserve, later 1908 to become the Routt. But the forest was largely young. A lot of it had burned. And as we go forward in time, we get into the, sorry, I gotta go to my notes here. I kind of want to do the greatest hits, like these are the significant things. So the forest became the forest in 1908, the Routt National Forest. Significant events in the forest, and at that time, fire was not a significant actor. And actually, looking at the statistics back then from 1909 to 1940, the average acres burned on the Routt was 66 acres a year. And compare that, and we'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about how many acres we're losing to wildland fire now. But, so young forest, little moisture, although there were periods of drought. One of those periods of drought, basically from 1939 into the 40s, we had the flat tops spruce bark beetle and killed a lot of trees. No one was living up there. It affected people. Certainly, it's an area we recreated and was a water source. But it was probably the next significant environmental event here in our area. And that was followed in 1997 by the Routt blowdown, which was an event that blew down somewhere around 13,000 acres, plus or minus, of spruce. Those of us who were here, it was a pretty impactful event. And it got studied a lot because scientists and entomologists and foresters understood that when you put a spruce tree that was vertical and you put it horizontal, it becomes an attractant for spruce bark beetle. So we had a big spruce bark beetle epidemic. We expected that. Again, fire people said, well, the periodicity, the time between fires here in this forest and the spruce was somewhere upwards of 600 years. So we can expect a fire now. And it wasn't much longer that we had the Zirkle fire. Actually, I remember it was in 2002. So that burnt up a lot of that spruce that had blown down. At the same time, again, greatest hits, so this was a major impact for all of us living here. The mountain pine beetle was starting to show in the 1990s, but in the 2000s, it had really started gathering some steam and became a significant factor. So those of you who lived here remember that hillsides were red, and we lost millions of acres of lodgepole and hundreds of thousands in Colorado. We only have 1.8 million total in Colorado. So we double counted some of those acres a few years, but they were impacted, and there was a lot of mortality. And then right around that 1999, 2000, we had another drought, and really since the year 2000, we're now 2 decades later, we've been in and out of drought, but mostly in drought. But there was a strong drought right around then, resulting in these larger fires. So that's one of the things that set the stage is fires went from an average of 66 acres before World War II to larger footprints, more intense fires affecting our forests. And so I just wrote a few of those down. 2013, the cod fire, 1,000 acres. 2017, we had Deep Creek, and we had Big Red. 2018, Silver Creek. And then 2020, kind of, I live in North Routt, so I got a pretty good view of the Middle Fork. And then the Morgan Creek fire in 2021, which was 7,600 acres. And all these fires, I mean, Zirkle was 31,000, it was a complex, there were several fires involved, and that started it. Then going to the Money Slide, which was 4,100 acres in 21. And I could see, certainly the Morgan and Middle Fork, I could see those. And the good thing is, and our fire managers out there know, these fire scars provide a place for those fires to run into. So in a way, Mother Nature is treating the forest regardless of what we do. Most of those fires, as I point out to my friends and neighbors, are to the east of me, where I live. And so just to be selfish, I look to the west of me and think, well, if we had a large fire to the west, we've got some values at risk to think about. So back to the forest. So the forest condition today, when mountain pine beetle epidemic probably peaked here around 2008, we were harvesting timber. Of course, it was in the middle of a recession, so that didn't help. But it's interesting because at the time, Andy Cadenhead and I worked together in the U.S. Forest Service. He's a good friend and a very forward thinker. He's no longer with us, but at that time, the numbers coming out were like, well, we got about 5 years of this, and the wood's not going to be any good. And we're still saying, well, we got about 5 years of this, and then this wood won't be any good. So lodgepole has this incredible resiliency, if you will, to still be turned into product. It's turned into 2x4s, but it also gives us forest managers, resource managers, a way to treat large amount of acres at low or no cost because we can salvage the value. That's not going to be true in the future, but it's been true, and it'll be true for another 5 years, I think. So that's kind of leaves us where we are now, where we have treated a lot. The forest has come back, but we're back into a pretty good little drought cycle right now. So last year we got a lot of calls. It was one of those slides that we left it up there. There was a slide of subalpine decline. It's usually attributed to bark beetle, but it's really a complex. There's a fungus involved. But probably more importantly, it's just dry soil. We went out with the U.S. Forest Service right before Morgan Creek, actually. A bunch of us with Forest Service and entomologists and pathologists went out to try to answer the question. We're getting a lot of calls, and the Forest Service was too. Why are these young trees dying? And basically, there wasn't bark beetles killing these little saplings. It's just dry soil. And so drought stresses trees and leads to the situation that we're facing today. Very quickly. So what have we been doing about this? We had the Healthy Forest Restoration Act in 2003. That pushed the CWPP concept. That also provided some funding for it. So we did a lot of grassroots CWPPs at the time, community driven. And so pretty, here in Steamboat Pines, Burgess Creek had their own CWPP. 2007, Fish Creek Sanctuary, North Routt also in 2007, 2008 Stagecoach, 2010 we did, and then the policy changed and they wanted a countywide, so we did countywide in 2010. All of this pretty community driven. The State Forest Service was involved. I don't think any of those were consultant written. In 2019, we had Fish Creek CWPP squared, so critical watershed CWPP, so just a specialty, if you will. And that was consultant driven, but we were all involved, we were all at the table. As a result of those CWPPs, particularly back in the day, so looking back, the Routt County CWPP is 10 years old. So there were a lot of treatments and there were a lot of values identified as a result of those CWPPs. And I'll end by just saying, we want to make sure we look at where we've been as we look forward to where we're going. You can do that if you want.
All right, so thanks, John, for setting that scene. Yeah, as was mentioned, we're seeing hotter and drier conditions. Across the western U.S., wildfire activity starting earlier in the spring and lasting longer into the fall. Above average normal fire activity periods typically last 75 days longer now than they did 40 years ago. So if you think that there's more fire now, you're right, there is. And these warmer and drier conditions are having an impact on the forest. And Routt National Forest is usually the higher elevations of our area here, extending out the Blair Sears area along the Park Range south for the local area here. So we're seeing longer growing seasons, we're seeing less freezes, and that means we have more forest pests. So pests like pine beetle, insects and disease essentially. And the drier weather that John mentioned is, we're in a prolonged drought right now, and this means trees are weaker and they can't defend themselves against those pests and those diseases as well. Because remember, when we talk about mountain pine beetle or many of these other insects that are killing trees, these aren't invasive species that came in from nowhere. They've been here all along. They're part of a healthy forest system, but when we're in a drought and trees are weak, we're seeing increased pine beetles, increased insects, increased mortality of trees. So they're just having a larger impact when we're in such hotter and drier conditions. So here on Routt, we have a lot of dead and down trees, and it's because we're in an extended drought, because of the hotter and drier conditions, increased mortality of trees. I wish I could put up a photo, because this past year, when we had Warren Creek fire, and I got up in a helicopter to see the fire, we flew over the forest, and what really stood out to me was that aerial view looking back down on our local forest here. It's just trees all over the ground. It's like you take a matchbox and you stump it out on the ground. There's a lot down. And if you try to hike through the forest, not on a trail, especially mainly in the lodgepole areas, it's not an easy thing to do. It's like, there's places you really just can't even get through. So, you can walk through Aspen Grove or other areas. We try to walk through a lodgepole pine forest around here. It's almost impossible. So let's see, a couple of things I'll mention here. We have a lot of fuels on the ground. So that's that those dead and down trees. And when we have such a high amount of fuels, that's increasing the fire behavior and intensity that we see here. That's why we're seeing fires that are taking off very quickly, and you can't get out in front of a fire and stop it. Once it gets going, you get out of the way and you need opportunities to actually address it. So additionally, fiery tumor intervals, which are how long in between major fire activity. We're in our lodgepole pine forest, they're around 150 years. And John mentioned that fire activity back in the late 1800s and most 1900s. That's about 150 years ago, so we're actually somewhat on track with that historic fire return interval here. So there's a number of combinations of things happening. We've got, mono H class trees that are at their time when they're supposed to burn, what we've seen historically, and then you've just got a combination of the hotter and drier conditions too that add to that. And so here it was mentioned by John that last year we had the Muddy Slide Fire down near Yampa. We had Morgan Creek, and that, by the way, the Muddy Slide Fire started in June, and then in July we had the Morgan Creek Fire up the road along the Seed House corridor here. And the year before that, and also a number of other fires in our area, like Medicine-Bow and our national forests, East Troubles, and the others that we mentioned. So thankfully, these are fires you hear about. Thankfully, nationally, we catch about 95% of the fires that start. So that's a pretty good record. But sometimes they start and you can't catch them for multiple reasons. So we have great relationships and agreements with our partners in our area here, the FBC, BLM, others, where we can work fairly seamlessly to respond to fire. We don't stop to look where the fire is, where the boundary is, whose responsibility it is. We all work together to get closest available resources on that fire to get it addressed immediately, and then we worry about the paperwork later, essentially. And that's served us well for addressing the wildfires we have here, and we're going to continue to see wildfires for the foreseeable future. I think it's safe to say. So what are we doing about it here? Well, we're doing a lot of things on this forest to prevent wildfire, to give us places to be able to actually take on that wildfire and stop it. So a number of projects across the forest we're working on, and I'll just mention a couple of those real quick. Steamboat Front, you may have heard of that, essentially is the wildland urban interface, the WUI, which is the area where forest meets town or homes. We're seeing more homes in these WUI areas. So the Steamboat Front is focused on that wildland urban interface. It essentially is a stretch from around Mad Creek all the way down to Highway 40, where the forest comes down towards town, private land. And that's a number of treatments that we've got in that project where we've been addressing vegetation, removing fuels, masticating it, and doing prescribed burning. This year already, in the last month, we've burned 150 acres, which is pretty fantastic, up around the Strawberry Spring, Hot Springs area. So we're doing a lot of work there, and that, by the way, is a Good Neighbor Authority project. And that Good Neighbor Authority is the ability for our federal agency to work closely with our partners, in this case, the state. And so we've been working with John and the Colorado State Forest Service to implement the Steamboat Front project and the work that's been getting done on the ground out there. We also have the North Cal Fuels project that's coming up for implementation this summer, and that is addressing the large lodgepole pine mortality around Steamboat Lake, mostly focused on where the national forest meets the private land boundaries. So that too is a Good Neighbor Authority, and we're excited to have the Colorado State Forest Service implementing that project for us. And then in the future, we started this year our planning process to develop the Bears Ears project, which is a large-scale project to deal with fuels and forest health. And these are all forest and fuel health projects. So that's why we're out there doing these things, to have a healthy forest and to address the potential for wildfire. So the Bears Ears project covers that whole Bears Ears area. So essentially from just northeast of Craig, all the way over to 129 or California Park area. And that's probably at least a year or two out for planning and work we need to do to put that together. So we can't, the bottom line is we in Forest Service can't accomplish landscape level changes on our own. So having these partnerships, having these folks that we can work with together, state, BLM, other agencies, we can actually make that difference on the ground. We need to be able to leverage those partnerships to get the work done at a landscape scale is what has to happen. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of our partners.
My name is Tony Tolley. I'm the Fuels Program Lead for the Northwest Colorado Fire Management Unit. Basically, we're composed of about 3.1 million acres in the Kremlin, Craig, and Meeker areas. So as you can imagine, these guys laid how the forest health conditions are. For us in the Kremlin field office, that's where John and I have done a lot of our work. We partner very well with the State Forest Service and utilizing the Good Neighbor Authority. But then when you start moving over into Routt County, we as the BLM are just starting to use the Good Neighbor Authority. The Forest Service is on board, the BLM. We're a pretty small player, as you can imagine. We don't have the landscape that the Forest Service does in North Routt, but we're excited to have completed our NEPA to start stepping up those opportunities as well. I'm not going to go into the history of fire with the BLM because we're very divergent. Our Kremlin field office has experienced these troublesome fire. When you get over into Craig and the Meeker area, we're very frequent visitors to fire. We, completely different fuel types, a little less urban interface, unless you get into our oil and gas challenges and some things like that. We start focused on in those areas more of our safe trails habitat. But the one thing that we have found that's very universal between, the Forest Service, the State Forest Service, and just the trends in Colorado is some of the folks in here have worked in our fire program. We didn't typically order a lot of incident management teams to help us with long-term fire and depending juniper. Yes, when we did have fires, in conifer types, which a lot of you folks are interested in Routt County. We had longer duration fires. What we're seeing for us in the BLM though is that now we're having these, events in PJ that we're actually ordering teams for and managing, week to 2 week period of time. And that's just a testament, as John spoke, and we've all been indicating, it's just the changing conditions. The same thing that's challenging, forest managers in high elevation is also challenging, those of us that deal with, our lower elevation country types. And, just anywhere in Colorado is showing a change. People are moving here from all over. So surprisingly enough, Craig is even booming, even though we're having a change in our economic status in the near future. So I think it's just the challenges that we're facing. The one cool thing that I do have to talk about is just the partnerships. The big thing and the reason why you guys are here, utilizing these opportunities, having these, looking at your new community wildfire protection plans. These are the opportunities that these folks talked about that are going to be really critical for you guys. And we as the BLM, I'm sure the Forest Service, when we have private partners come to us and want to do cross-boundary work, this is where these projects are going to get identified. And that's what I'm really excited to be able to, where we can come in and be partners in those kind of opportunities. I know we're a little bit different, than a lot of the Forest Service opportunities. But the one cool thing that the BLM does have, Brandon Vogel is my mitigation, education, and prevention specialist. Folks know Brandon because of his involvement in community assistance. And so I'm going to let him speak to some of the opportunities he can provide. But part of the funding into the Routt County Wildfire Council is coming through that assistance. So this is kind of where we really like to step up and support these kind of efforts right here.
Check. Yep, so Tony already introduced me there. So Brandon Vogel, I'm the mitigation, education, and prevention specialist for the BLM. I have a pretty interesting job. I think one of the coolest things that I get to deal with, like Tony said, is the community assistance program that the BLM has. It's somewhat unique to the BLM amongst the federal agencies. I don't think any other agency has that program. It's basically a grant program. The reason it's a grant program is because federal government doesn't actually have jurisdiction to work on private lands. That's why we have to do things through agreements and good neighbor authority. We can do some work, but through the community assistance program, we can work with 501c organizations and local governments, be it, fire districts, emergency management offices, or any nonprofit organization, whether that's a nonprofit HOA or Routt County Wildfire Council, or anything like that. And we can use our grant funds through the federal government to help provide assistance funds to these organizations so we can get out there and we can help mitigate acres or do public outreach to talk about the hazards of the wildfire environment. So locally here in Routt County, through the Community Assistance Program, the BLM currently is donating grant funds to the Routt County Wildfire Council. We actually helped put up seed money for the Routt County Wildfire Council a couple of years ago. And then we also work with Yampa Valley Electric as well to help them mitigate some of the right-of-way acres. And that's a huge plus as well. I know one thing to think about with the power lines is I know not everybody's super into mitigating under the power lines, but in the event of a wildfire, it's a big deal to keep the power on when that starts coming towards town. That can help with evacuations, that can help so people can get the message, keep the internet connections up, all sorts of good things. So don't forget about that as well. And then through the Routt County Wildfire Council, I just like to say thanks to everybody in the room for making everything happen. That is one of the things about the community assistance program is it's up to these 501c organizations to get the work done and go out there and do good things. And so far, I think the Routt County Wildfire Council has been doing a great job. I don't really have much else to say, so I'll wrap it up quick there. And then I think we're going to go to questions. We are.
So, we're going to go to questions. And so, if you have note cards and pens in the middle of your tables, if you're more comfortable writing a note down, your question, and I'll come read it. Or if you are just ready to jump in there and ask a question, do so. As you're thinking about this question, I want to make a comment to our panel. I was told years ago what makes for a great speech, a great presentation, a great movie is that highs and lows, your emotions, excited and sad. This panel was full of that. I heard blow down and spruce beetle and dying fir, and then I heard, hey, we've got some cool things going on. We're going to plan for protection, and we've got great programs. I heard 75 more days of fire every year, and then I heard, oh, doing great work. And so, thank you guys. Well done. Well done. What questions do you all have? I see right back here. Caroline's got this one.
I'm Sally Ross with Oak Creek Fire Protection District. Thanks for the presentation. I think maybe not so much a question, but an observation of the unique position that we're in Routt County with so many private lands that abut these public parcels and the partnerships that those private landowners are able to build with you all to seek guidance for grant funding and project implementation. I think enhancing those relationships as we move forward with all this funding that's coming down the pipeline is going to be really critical for not only the community preparedness piece, but also the resource quality piece as well. And so I would love as we move forward as a council to see